is very good to be back. I just finished my 8-day silent retreat. Just got out of it, and I thank you for your prayers, and I hope you guys got some good graces out of it too. It's been hard to kind of come back into reality and actually have to deal with the dramas that come with living and talking with other people. Some people I still pretend that I'm on retreat with. They'll come to me and try to talk to me. I'm silent. I'll call you next month when I'm done with all of this. Alberto's in the back right now. Is that why he's not answering my texts? Basically. You know, as the Gospel of Mark, we just heard what's really important about this gospel scene, about these healings that took place, is really the progression of events of what happened before and after this gospel scene itself. Because as we talked about last week, where was Jesus just before this? He was on the boat going over the troubled sea. And Jesus revealed his power as God over all of nature by one single word, telling the wind and the waves to be still, and they obeyed. And then this actually skips one scene before we get to the gospel today. When he arrives to the other side on that boat, he arrives in a pagan land and immediately finds a man who was possessed by a legion of demons. A legion's like 6,000 demons. And at one word, Jesus is able to expel those demons into swine who then run off the cliff. And what that shows is that Jesus has, as the Son of God, not only power over nature, over the world, but also over all demons, demoniacs. But then the next thing that happened, which is what's most interesting, is that the people in that region who don't believe in Jesus, who aren't looking for a Messiah, what's their response when they encounter him? They ask him to leave. They ask him to leave their land. And we're not told exactly the reason they give on why, but they just ask him to go. We do not want you in our land. And what does Jesus do? What's his response? He gets on his boat and he leaves. And what that shows us is that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who has all power over the world, the natural world, and all power even over evil spirits, the one place he is limited is our free will. I have to say yes to Jesus Christ coming into my land, into my person, into my being, and welcome the saving grace that he comes to offer. And that's the next scene that we just read about today, right in the gospel. A man with a child who has just died, and a woman with a hemorrhage who's been bleeding for 12 years. That because, Jesus says, because of your faith, you have been saved. When the man hears that his daughter has died, just have faith. And the next scene after where he goes from here, after curing that woman and raising this child from the dead, he goes home. And it says that when he goes home, he wasn't able to perform miracles. Why? Because they were scandalized that they knew him. And that's where he says no prophet is accepted in his own town. And it was because of their lack of faith that he could not perform these miracles. So what faith does is it opens us up to invite Jesus Christ into our land, especially into our sorrows and our sufferings, believing that by his power he can redeem me. I want to share with you one of the biggest graces I got from my retreat as I felt it related to this gospel. You know, this is the first time I've ever really just spent the entire retreat at home. So I didn't go anywhere new. That way I could have my own bed and my own coffee. I have a chapel right next door to me, so I don't got to do too much work for that. And I would just sleep there. I'd wake up and I'd go to the mountains every day. And I'd go to this river that was just south of Idaho City, just like in this little hidden nook between mountains. And I'd just sit in that stream in a chair for like 5 hours at a time. It was a really rough week. Thank you for your prayers for my soul. Now, it was beautiful, and I would just read the scriptures and meditate. And one of the days I was there, what really jumped out at me was the Beatitudes. And the question that came with the Beatitudes was, what is the most important beatitude in your life? Like, if you had to choose one beatitude to define how you wanted to live, what would that be? It definitely wasn't blessed are the hungry, because I was fasting and I hated that experience, so I didn't want to go back to that. But what came up really strong was, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. And we tend to think about purity of heart as, okay, if I'm not struggling with lust, or how you live celibacy, or chastity, right, sexual sins or whatever. That's not it. That's a part of it. And purity is really essential in our life to perceive God. But true purity of heart that enables us to see God is when I'm seeing my life and all of reality as God sees it. That's the most difficult thing that we have. Am I seeing my life in light of the way God sees it, or am I projecting what I believe it should be, or its faults, from my own limited perception? All right, that's why I warn everybody from the hell I passed through of just getting sucked so much into the media and the news. Because the more I got sucked into what was happening in the world all over with politics and with the church, the more I became blinded to God's presence right in front of me. Because I wasn't seeing reality as it is in God. So I was praying for this gift of just a purity of heart, and as I was doing that, I saw like two ghosts, like two people from my past that I've lost, that I never got over. One was one was a family member, and one was someone I was very close with before I answered the call to become a priest. And both of those relationships at one point in my life died. They're gone. And what I couldn't believe when I thought about this is like, that woman was suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years. I was like, it's been almost 20 years, and I still feel the flow of blood. I still feel that loss. And so these like wounds were coming out, and I have to admit, I get triggered by even hearing the word wound or trauma or healing. Just, it's like, oh, another one. You know what I mean? It's like we can get kind of trapped in that sometimes. My response every time I feel a wound come up, I think about that scene from The Godfather when Johnny Fontaine comes to Marlon Brando and asks, he's crying because he can't get his job in Hollywood as a famous actor, and Marlon Brando just slaps him in the face and shakes him. He's like, what can I do? What can I do? He goes, you can act like a man, just get through it, push it. And that's how I usually respond to like traumas. I take a deep breath, and I bury those negative emotions really far down. I suppress it all. And then I reach into my pocket and I pull out my cell phone and I turn on YouTube. And it's all fixed just like that. It all goes away. You don't have to worry about it. But there's two problems. I couldn't look at YouTube on my retreat, and I didn't have service. So even when I was trying, it just wasn't working. And so I actually had to contend with these demons, if you were, these ghosts from the past coming up. And what I was so upset about was that it was still there. But something happened, like over this week, when I was praying with these events. These sufferings have just been there for years now, asking God, where was he? And why doesn't he just let it go away? What happened, and this was the greatest miracle of all, is the bleeding didn't stop. But I saw the wounds in the first time through the light of God's vision. The purity of heart that I thought I needed was eradicate suffering, eradicate pain, eradicate any painful memories, and then I'll be pure of heart. But what ended up happening was I saw for the first time these losses in my life in light of God's vision, which was completely different from the way I projected it. And it reminded me of this, it's a story, it's kind of a cliche Chinese fable, but it really was the experience I would say I had. They say once upon a time in ancient China, there was this monk, right, who would go down to a stream every day with a bamboo stick with two pots on each side of his arm. Have you guys heard this before? No? All right, so he had two pots on each side, water jugs, And one was whole, the other one had a bunch of holes in it. And so he'd go down every day, he'd fill up those pots, and he'd put them on the bamboo sticks, and he'd carry it on his shoulders and go up and down collecting water for the monastery. And one day, the pot with holes in it was conscious, and it was very self-conscious at this moment, and he apologized to the monk. He said, "Master, I'm sorry that I am imperfect and could not keep the water from sprinkling through these holes in my sides, unlike the other pot that has everything together and is always filled when you bring it home." And the young monk just smiled slightly and nodded his head knowingly. And he went back to the well, and the young monk drew the water, and he filled the buckets again. And this time, as they were walking back, very slowly, the monk said to the leaky bucket, "Look to the side of the road where the perfect bucket passes. It's barren. Not even a blade of grass is growing on it." Right? But then pointing to the blooming flowers on the other side of the road, the young monk said, "And see these beautiful flowers. These are here only because of the water that you sprinkled on them every day. They owe their existence to you. And we're able to enjoy the beauty of those flowers only because of you. Your imperfections has been a source of blessing for all." And when I saw, these wounds, these holes in my life, from my perspective, all I saw was imperfection. All I saw was holes. And every way I've ever tried to plug those up so that I can be perfectly whole and retain everything that I need to of God's grace. And after seeing my life through God's vision on the same holes, the same imperfections, I saw that the most beautiful aspects of my life were there not in spite of the holes, but because of it. I realized I received more in my life from their absence than they ever gave me from their presence, because in their absence, God became present. And I think that's what true purity of heart really means. That's what true healing means for us, because there is no perfect bucket. There is no getting through life without wounds, without traumas, without being hurt by family, by loved ones, by the world. But when we're able to see our life with all of its imperfections, with all of its struggles, with all of its holes, as this is the very way that God has worked through me to bless those around me and to draw me closer to Him, that's the greatest freedom and joy and purity of vision we could ever have for our lives. And that's exactly what we do every single time we come to Mass. The essence of every single Mass that we enter into, everything flows from the wounded hands and the pierced side and feet of Jesus Christ. Wounds that were never healed. Wounds that He carries within Him, even in heaven, and have become the source of all grace and blessing every single time we come to Holy Mass. From His wounds, the blood continues to pour forth. And those who recognize Him on this altar and receive His body and blood with faith, because that's one caveat. Many people touched Jesus. As the disciple said, only one received healing, because one received Him with faith. Many people touch the Holy Eucharist. Many people receive Him every single day perhaps, but they don't experience healing because they don't receive Him with faith in His power. To the degree that we see Him and recognize Him, and by faith invite Him into our land in every single piece of it, we too, like that woman and man in today's gospel, can experience his healing power.